This is AJ, your ace in the hole, and today we're doing something a little different. Today, I'm sharing a little bit from a recent interview I had with my new friend and YouTube retirement extraordinaire, David from the David in Progress channel. We recently got together to discuss our channels and personal finance topics, and today's video is an abridged, edited version of that conversation, with a little bonus commentary sprinkled in. After this, feel free to head over to the David in Progress channel, which I link below, for the full-length version, as I'm sure between the two, there's a little something for everyone. That said, let's cut right to the interview.
Hey everybody, it's David here at David in Progress. I have a fantastic session today. I am bringing along a special guest. I have AJ from the fantastic financial YouTube channel, Ace in the Hole. Give us a wave, AJ.
Hey everyone, how you doing? Thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, well, AJ has this great channel that I have been obsessively watching the last couple of months, and I thought it would be so great to bring him on my channel and talk to him to get to know him a little bit, just selfishly wanting to know more about AJ, but just as importantly, so that you can meet AJ and get introduced to his content. Thank you, AJ. Thank you so much. Welcome to David in Progress.
Great to be here.
Well, hey, let's get right into it. I got some questions here. Going to ask you a little bit about your financial journey, and then I really want to hear more about your channel. And we met a little bit before this to get to know each other, and I understand that we have somewhat of a similar financial journey in some ways, in that we were both laid off. Can you share a little bit about your financial journey leading up to that layoff, and what happened after you got that notice?
Yeah, so I like to think my financial journey started long ago, like very long ago. My parents and grandparents were always super helpful. They had savings accounts opened up for me really young. We used to, put all our birthday money there. I started work really young. My parents had their own business, and I started working as a young teenager, just doing little side hustle help with my parents. I actually started a real job, my first real job, W-2, when I was about 16 years old. If you remember back then, you had to get a work permit from your parents to even get a job before 18. Always was working, always super excited about making my own money and being able to buy my own things. Kind of probably a little freak of nature, because most of my friends weren't the same way. In fact, I think I was one of maybe 5 people in high school that owned their own vehicle, by the time we got to our senior year. So,
is this a vehicle you paid for yourself?
Yep, sure did. So all that side hustle money, I saved up a couple $1,000s, bought me a nice little, beater car, and it was enough to get me around to concerts and, to and from work, and that was it. So no car loans early on in my financial journey. From there, I got my first job, probably in my 20s. Was super excited to have access to a 401k. I'd love to have maxed out my 401k at that point, but obviously I was just a young warehouse worker. Didn't make that much money, but I started contributing right away. And then, every time I got a raise, I'd add a little more to my 401k. And over many, many years, eventually you start really, seeing your 401k grow. And that was exciting as well. Never really carried much debt. So I was a, anti-debt guy just by nature. I never really carried a lot of debt in life. Hey there, hopping in just for a sec. So the debt I mention here also includes credit card debt as well. This is a wealth killer to most, especially young adults. So when you're done here, check out my video on the horrors of credit cards, where I walk through the very moment I realized I needed to focus on avoiding debt. The link's down in the description below. Now, back to the video. Always paid off cars in half time. When I eventually got to a point where I made enough money to buy a new car and have a car loan, I would even temper that and say, I want to be able to pay it off in half the time, right? So say 2.5 years versus a standard 5-year car loan. So I would only buy enough car that I could afford to do that with. So little things along the way. I was just always terrified to slip into any kind of real debt. Now, flash forward to the layoff. So working in corporate America, finally came up on my 30-year anniversary and got laid off, like you said, kicked to the curb with many others at my company, but I was one of the ones. Yeah, from there, I think where financial journey intersected with my layoff situation is it definitely helped temper the emotional aspect of that, which was pretty elaborate. I didn't expect such an emotional reaction to getting laid off. Obviously, it's, you're sad and it's a little disturbing because now you lose that income, but financial journey that I had upon me was able to put myself in a position at this point in my life where it definitely eased the landing a little bit, so to speak, of the layoff for sure.
First of all, fantastic on that journey, as far as being debt free and saving early and all those things. And But prior to that, was your goal to retire early, or did the layoff kind of trigger that idea that, well, hey, well, maybe I'm financially independent and don't need to go back to work, or I can wait a few years before I go back, or whatever. Did you have that financial independence mindset that you wanted to retire early?
When I was young, I would say no. Probably like most youngsters, you're not even thinking that far out. At first it was kind of those line of sight goals, right? Like first I want to eventually get my first house, and then eventually I'll be able. I think I bought my first three cars were paid with cash. I never got I just didn't want to take out a car loan. I just bought little cars along the way, and then or affordable cars, I should say, used cars. But another goal was eventually I'd like to treat myself to a new car, but I waited until I made enough money to do so. So I wasn't ever really thinking about retirement at that point. But later in life, then yes, I started thinking. My wife and I never had kids, so we didn't have that, which is a major expense, obviously. So we never had that. So that gave us a little leg up financially. But from there, probably halfway through, I'd call it my career journey, I started then looking out into the future retirement. And then it became a goal, so to speak, to try to retire early. So I think we set a goal to say maybe let's aim for maybe 60 years old. And I had my own personal stretch goal of 57. So
Wow.
when I reached 57, I was going to assess our situation and see would it be possible to retire even early. And then the irony, I got laid off at 56,
You're like,
and I
oh,
got a
well,
yeah, I got a little severance package, so that was great. Kudos to my company for helping us there. But and that ran out, ironically, at age 57. So I took a good hard look at our financial situation. And again, we are by no stretch gazillionaires, but it definitely eased the pain a little bit, so to speak, because I knew I at least had a little bit of runway here to play with without having to, as I call it, break glass and have to go out and try to find something, as soon as possible.
so did you basically have that epiphany moment after looking at your numbers and going, oh, hey, wow, work is kind of optional for me. I can do whatever I want right now for a while.
Yeah, it was. So, as you recall, back in 2020, right before the COVID shutdown, the markets were really, really taking off. All of our 401ks were booming right around that time. And that's when I really noticed it. Obviously, we had a lot of windshield time, so to speak, in the middle of the lockdown. And I started really researching our situation because it was pretty scary back then where companies were shutting down. My wife lost her job. I didn't, thank goodness, because I had a remote job, so I was able to keep working at my existing job. But it definitely made us do a little level set and see where we were. And that's when the light bulb really went off for me to say, wow, we're doing like really good as it relates to how much we spend a year and how much our nest egg has grown to. Again, we're not gazillionaires, but when you look at how much you spend in a year, that's the only number that really matters. Do you have enough to kind of carry you forward with that? And that's really probably the pivotal moment where I said, "Hey, let's take a look at this and make a stretch. Like let's really try to get out of here early if we can do it." And then flash forward, what less than 5 years later, then the layoff happened. So that put us in our place, so to speak.
Well, what your story is telling me, and what I'm reading between the lines, but I really love to hear stories like yours and hopefully share stories like mine is you kept saying not gazillionaire or whatever. It's just regular people who understand their expenses and save simply over a long period of time. And then at some point you see that magic of compounding. I've watched your video on that, which is really great. And you're like, oh man, I can maybe do this. And so that thing happens and you get laid off and you get that severance or whatever. And then how do you end up landing on a YouTube channel to say, you know what, I'm going to teach other people about finance? What triggered that for you?
A couple of things. So I had always been a creative person. So I've done music and photography most of my life as a hobbyist. When again 2020 hit and we got locked down and I started assessing our financial situation, I really dove into YouTube financial school. So I started really watching channels about retirement, preparation for retirement, that sort of thing. And I've always had a passion for finance. I used to play around in the stock market in my 20s. Not a lot of money, just what I could afford to play. So I've always been extremely interested and passionate about personal finance in general. Then, when the layoff occurred, I had to gut check myself and say, well, what do I want to do here? I'm at a milestone, so do I want to quickly find another job in corporate America? Do I want to take some time off? And I just started brainstorming about what I might want to do. And I said, what if I crafted my perfect job from here on out? And I started assessing all my skills, all my equipment and gear. I had a lot of gear already established from some of these other projects, and I just took a look at everything and said, you know what, this, and again, my passion for finance. And then I noticed on YouTube there wasn't a tremendous amount of channels geared towards younger individuals, right? And I said this might be something I would want to try, because I like to say I'm over that part of the hill, not over the hill. I'll say I'm over that. I'm cresting the hill as we speak. And I have a lot of, I think, good, proven personal things that I've accomplished in my life financially, strategies, techniques, things I did that worked for me. It may not even be a common practice, or in some cases they may go against the grain of some of the, financial tips you'll get from real financial advisors. I just know what worked for me. And I said, you know what? If I add all this together, all the skills, all my passions in life, and put them into a stew pot, this might be a really fun thing to try and hopefully help some people along the way, particularly young adults, parents that are looking for ideas for their kids. Maybe they've got some new kids on the block and they're trying to figure out what to do for their kids financially, and really just anyone else that's just starting to dabble in finance at any point in their life. So that's what really got me kickstarted here, and it's been a blast ever since.
I know I very much enjoyed it. You have really straightforward content, and I know you mentioned younger people, but you also mentioned, which I think is really important, is that even an old person like myself, I got a lot of value, and I'm getting a lot of value from your channel, the learning things. And it's just amazing how here on the internet there's just so many resources, and your channel is unique, like you said, in that niche for the not only the younger people, but I really could see grandma, saying, "Hey, watch
Hmm.
this," or mom, playing it on the TV so the kid is seeing it. Kind of like your latest video that I just watched earlier was the one about stages by year.
Hmm.
Ages. I thought that was absolutely terrific. So to me, your channel is universal no matter what age, even though you're targeting the younger people. But younger people hopefully have that older person that's kind of in their ear telling them something. But we all know our kids don't want to hear from us because they hear us all the time. So it's good to have that other voice out there kind of talking into their ear, kind of like you.
Right. Yeah, I think it's so important that, and the reason I talk about the younger years is everyone, you hear a lot of advisors say this, everyone can retire a millionaire. And that's not an exaggeration. It's just about how early you start. There's lots of videos about compounding interest and all, but it's so beyond that. And when you start so early in life, you don't need as much. So, well, a lot of folks say, well, I don't make enough to save and build that kind of financial future. But you don't need a lot if you start early enough. So the key is starting early and getting all these different levers working for yourself, but doing it early in life. Parents, again, there's so many options now. There's even new ones coming out in 2026. There's no excuse not to put pennies aside for your child as soon as they're born and just let them brew through their entire life. Again, you hear people say it all the time. There's no reason that anyone can't retire a millionaire.
Is that because that kind of leads me into my next question I had written down here was that, you know, one or two top things you would tell a younger person, say someone 20 years younger, 30 years younger, if you were to give them your top advice, just a couple of things, what would you tell them? And I know you kind of covered it a little bit.
There's a couple, and they're pretty simple. I'd say the first one, and I did this as a youngster, and I look back and I go, why did I do that? Because no one taught me this, but I always track my expenses, and I mean everything. I tracked everything. I just was curious to know where all my money was going. And then later in life, I realized it's a good thing I did that, because I've met with a lot of financial advisors later in life about retirement and whatnot. And you need to know your numbers. There's so many situations that you're going to run into where you need to know that number. And what was so revolutionary for me was learning where I was wasting money so early in life. Sorry, I have to jump in here, as this is so important for young adults. Not only is understanding where you're wasting your money so important, but more so that you catch it early on, helping you establish good financial habits from the start. You can then turn those pennies into dollars, and I mean lots of dollars, by investing early in life. After this video is done, check out my two-part video series here on the top 20 financial mistakes and ways to avoid them, also linked below. Now, let's head back. And that was a great thing to learn as a youngster. First one I would say is track your expenses, know your numbers, living within your means. That was one that myself, and luckily I married my wife, and she had the absolute same philosophy. Again, no one really taught us that. I think we probably maybe noticed it from our parents, because our parents were pretty they were not terribly well off, and they always just kind of live, we live with what we had. So maybe we philosophically learned that, subconsciously, just live in that environment.
Now, you're
But we
lucky to have had
always,
those good examples, sounds like.
yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of people will tell you about living within your means, but you got to do it. And it's so hard. It's so hard. Again, we don't have kids, but we have lots of nieces and nephews. So I'm very familiar with the newer generations coming on up here. And even they blow so much money, it's hard to watch. So living within your means is so critical, and it's hard. I know it's hard, and I try to preach it. I probably end up saying that in many more videos than I'd like to, but because it's not easy to do. And then I guess finally a bonus one is automate everything. Automate your savings. I remember when I first got my 401k. Back then, we didn't even have direct deposit. So, but now there's no reason to not do this. So, automate yourself, trick yourself into saving early in life. Just take a small percentage of every paycheck, set it up so it goes into your savings account. You could then even set it up in your savings account to invest it automatically. So there's no reason. And I think that's a fundamental thing I did for myself. I like to call it tricking yourself because it's hard. And then over your lifetime, every time you get a raise, more goes into your savings, and you never miss it because you're also taking home more. You're just kind of splitting it. I call it my 50-50 rule, where you're 50-50 savings rule, where you always split your next raise with yourself. 50% goes to your retirement, 50% goes to you. So you always feel like you're taking home more fun money. But meanwhile, you're also raising your retirement savings, So yeah, to summarize, I'd say track your expenses, know your numbers. You have to know it. And the best part of that is learning where you're wasting your money. Live within your means, and then automate all your savings and investing.
Your 50-50 rule you mentioned, that is new to me. I haven't heard that one before. That was really interesting. And I'm going to say, I know that those of us, you're making it all sunshine and roses, your little journey here to your financial independence and everything, but you've had to have made some big mistakes along the way where you learned some lessons. Well, do you have something you'd share that maybe a mistake that you made that if you could go back, maybe you'd tell the past you, hey, don't do this, or tell me, hey, don't be me?
Yeah, so I don't think I've ever made a financial mistake now that I think about it. No, that's an absolute lie. Yeah, there's a couple that have left a mark as well. I'll say my biggest financial mistake. I'm gonna give a little bit of hint here because ironically I just talked about this mistake in my latest video that's coming out in a few weeks around basic stock investing. And it was a stock investing mistake. And again, I'll give you the cliff notes, but you check out the video because I describe exactly what happened. But yeah, this was a doozy. So early on in my investing career, I finally saved up. I always wanted to buy some stock of a particular company. And I bought in, and the market went wacky, and I panic sold. And I still made out okay after almost losing it all, but then I salvaged it, so to speak. But then that stock got on a run after I sold, and I keep a spreadsheet. I probably shouldn't do this because it's not healthy, but I keep a spreadsheet that shows me what I would have held. I held that stock.
Yeah, don't
And
do
it
that.
was hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that was the biggest, I'll call it an investing mistake I made. Never made it again because it was very evident what I did wrong there. But it was literally hundreds of thousands of dollars mistake. But that aside, and again, check out my video. It's coming out on basic stock investing, and I'll walk you through it. I even show you some charts. But the biggest one of all, probably besides that, was not starting a Roth IRA soon enough. I want to say Roth IRAs, if I recall, came on the scene around the 97, 98 time frame. And I remember people talking about it at work. But I go back to this whole lack of education thing with finance. It really was spun almost, it felt like kind of a black cloud thing. Yeah, it was a new option for you, aside from, say, a 401k and all the pre-tax IRAs that existed. But this was this new post-tax, thing called the Roth IRA. And it didn't make sense to me. No one really told you all the benefits to post-tax saving. And it was just spun as this after-tax vehicle, and it just didn't sound as attractive as what the pre-tax savings and investments gave you. But now flash forward, once I really started learning about personal finance and I really understood what a Roth IRA was all about, it was very evident that was a bad mistake to not get involved in a Roth IRA sooner. So since then, I set one up for my wife, set one up for me, and we just been trying to catch up ever since. So, okay, parents, this next part is a big one, so be sure to keep listening. This should be a top priority for your kids as soon as they start earning some real income, even prior to age 18. You can check out my Roth IRA for Beginners video here and at the link below. Trust me, you don't want to miss out on this opportunity. Now, back to the chat. If you're young, and all you need, parents out there, your kids just need some kind of income. It doesn't even have to be W-2 income. All they need is some level of earned income, and they can start contributing to a Roth IRA. In fact, for my niece, my sister's daughter, we got her excited. She was only 16 years old at the time. And I told my sister we need to open her a custodial Roth IRA, which is a Roth IRA for someone prior to 18. And I had my niece pick out 2 to 3 companies that she loved. So we found her an ETF that contained all those companies. And then for her birthday, we went ahead and purchased her a few shares inside of her new custodial Roth IRA for this ETF. The goal of that was obviously to give her buy-in, because now she's investing in companies she likes and she can see how that grows. And yeah, ever since then, I think it's sitting at almost 60% growth now, and
Oh,
she's
wow.
19 now. So it's doing fantastic, and she's in college now, but she does work on the weekends, and she continues to pile money into Roth IRA because she sees it work. And now we're getting ready to do that. Ironically, just this past week, my sister called in for her other daughter, our other niece. She's now 16, and she just opened up her first custodial Roth IRA. So we did the same thing.
Oh, yeah, I have a video on that too about my regrets, and Roth is one of my regrets. Had no idea about the custodial thing. Yeah, I wish I had thought of that when my son was younger, but especially for me and my Roth. But yeah, that is definitely a regret for me. Well, you've shared your journey, you gave some advice. So now, of course, I've watched almost every video that you have produced, but I said at the very, very beginning, this is a production value. You make it so very interesting and engaging with the graphics that you use, and you do go in depth. It's just fantastic. So for those of you out there who haven't checked out AJ's channel, Ace in the Hole, absolutely have to go out and watch it. I got one other thing on your channel. Tell me about that mascot. Explain that to me. What's his name again?
Yeah. So we got Professor Moolah. He's our little wise owl mascot we came up with at the start of the channel. So he helps every now and then. You'll see him popping up, here and there in some of the videos. But yeah, I came up with him to try to just help. And it's interesting because my grandfather had a nickname for me. He always called me Ace, and that's where the Ace from Ace in the Hole comes from. So yeah, and that spun into the spades and the little wise owl. So yeah, we even have some Professor Moolah paraphernalia. So for you coffee drinkers, or got some mouse pads and some things like that. But yeah, Professor Moolah, he's pretty helpful at times.
Yeah, I saw you have a merchandise store with your logo, 30% off, I think I saw there,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
right over your head, I think I see an
Yeah,
owl
he's
up
hanging
there
out up
behind you.
here. Yeah.
That is
Watching
just
over, making
fantastic.
sure I say everything correctly.
Well, I just can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you coming on the channel and telling me more about yours, but most importantly, sharing it with anyone that might watch it, especially all the way to the end here with us. It's just
Yep.
been so great and so much fun having you along. I really wish your channel the best of success. I hope you end up with thousands and thousands of viewers and lots and lots of subscriptions and all that good stuff. And before you know it, you'll be an internet superstar. And I'll have this record about when I got to interview AJ before he was super duper famous on the internet. So I was just so excited about it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is great. I like to say, I feel like my channel has the front end covered, and your channel has the back end covered. So between Ace in the Hole and David in Progress, you got your entire financial spectrum covered here. So yeah, thanks everybody for watching if you're still hanging in there. And thanks again, David, for having me.
Thank you so much for being part of this channel. And as AJ says, and all of us here on YouTube, thank you for the thumbs up and the subscriptions and the comments. That's how that algorithm lets YouTube know that, hey, people are enjoying this. So thank you very much for that. And I appreciate you being part of this channel. And AJ, thank you so much for joining me.